All right, we're recording now. So again, welcome and thank you for being here today. Today we're going to be doing a comprehensive workshop, but really just scratching the surface on storytelling for advocacy. My work at Pueblo Planning, I'm a practicing planner. However, a lot of the work I do is really facilitating spaces where people can share their story, and then also work with people so that they are able to then transition that story to a set of strategies or communicate a particular vision that they may have for their community. A lot of the work I've done has been primarily around public space access, has been around making places safer for biking and walking, and the like. I'm going to just show a little snapshot here of some of just a gallery of some of the work that we've done at Pueblo Planning. We've worked with clients such as LA Metro, which is a transit agency, to better understand how women travel. We've worked with street vendors in helping reconfigure public spaces so that they are able to vend their goods in a safe way and ensure that pedestrians have a walkway. We've worked with folks also in like community-based organizations that are doing work around trying to identify and organize around a community identity and provide a set of guidelines for developers. We've also have done some projects in partnership with advocacy organizations that are really trying to inform and move public policy and budgets so that safer infrastructure investment is put in communities. So I've engaged with a number of people who have either experienced being hit by a car or who have lost a loved one as a result. And so in these different spaces, people are sharing very vulnerable things. And how do we do that where in a way where people are safe, feel respected, but also have agency in what they choose to share and what they choose not to share as well. And so we'll be talking a bit about those things as we move forward. But before we get into the heart of all of that, what I'd like to do is to kind of just orient ourselves in place. We've got this little map here of the US, and I think all of us are mostly US based here. And if you could just, I'm gonna put this link in the chat box, so you'll have access to this. If you could just take one of these text boxes, write your name in it, and then place your name roughly over wherever you, approximately where you live. And this would just kind of like root us in place, and also kind of provide a space for us to collectively see where all our allies are in the US as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in the chat box for you all. And so if you just click on that hyperlink, it should take you directly to that slide. Go ahead and add your name, place it generally where you are located, and we'll be able to introduce ourselves in that way. For the sake of time, we won't be doing round robin, but we'll be able to see that physically in space as well. So as folks are working on that, I'd like, if possible, if someone feels brave enough, I'd like one volunteer without knowing what the situation is going to be.
Scary. I'll volunteer. I'll be brave.
All right, awesome. Okay, and who was that speaking?
That's
Alina?
Alina Lope. Yeah.
Okay, Alina, welcome, Alina. All right, awesome. I see people putting their names everywhere, and so hopefully after this little activity, we'll have this map fully filled out. Feel free, if there's not enough squares, feel free to add more squares as well. So, how many of you have seen this little video before? Has anyone seen it? feel free to use your little thumbs up or any emojis that you'd like. So this little video is a little bit new for folks. And so Alina, what I'm gonna have you do, I'm gonna play this video. It's about a minute long. I'm gonna have you in real time share what you're seeing in real time, okay? So you're gonna, these shapes are gonna be doing things, and I want you to share in real time what you are seeing, okay? So here we go. I'm gonna make it bigger. You're on, Alina.
Okay, so I see a door opening triangle inside the box, another triangle moving around a little circle. The first triangle is getting out of the door and they're bumping into each other. Okay, bump to bump. Now the circle's in trying to get into the rectangular box and the triangles are fighting one another. They keep bumping into each other. Okay, the circle is trying to get into the rectangular box. The first, I don't know if it's a first or second triangle, is like around the box. Okay, the bigger triangle is getting back into the box, closing the door for the smaller triangle to get into the box. And the circle, I don't know, he's going crazy inside the box. Oh, they're not letting the smaller triangle into the box. Now the circle and the smaller triangle are fighting, going around and around and around. The big triangle, it went in, went back out, and the smaller and the triangle and the circle are out of the picture. And I was just the big, ooh, broke the box. It's breaking everything. Ooh, sorry.
All right.
No, that was a mess.
No, that's great. That's great. So Alina, when you were describing what was happening, right? Whoops. 1 second. I didn't stop my video here.
Oh, well, we can't see it, so you're good.
Oh, great. Perfect. So while you were describing what was going on was essentially, you know, actually, before I do that, I need one more volunteer. Another volunteer.
I don't know. That's really hard to follow up on.
Well, you're gonna have a chance too, Vanessa.
Okay.
Would you like to? All right.
I'll be a guinea pig.
Okay, here we go. I want you to do the same thing too. Narrate what you're seeing. Okay.
Okay.
Here you go.
So it looks like the triangle is trying to break out of the box, and triangle is successfully broken out and is kind of going crazy around the box. But now we have two other characters, a triangle and a circle, who are outside of the box, kind of dancing around each other. They're pushing their way back into the box, and the circle is kind of going crazy. Looks like he's trapped in the box, and there's a lot of movement around the box with the triangles at this point, with the circle in the box, but now he's escaped, and both the triangles are kind of fighting each other again. And now the circle is kind of dancing around both the triangles. And one of the triangles has entered into the box and is kind of just chilling out in there. Oh, he's opened it back up again.
All right. All right. Thank you both for sharing. So I actually showed you both the same video. The second video was just in reverse, right? And so I showed these both videos to illustrate a couple of points. And these are two really important points in terms of like our role and responsibility as both storytellers and those who are facilitating storytelling sessions as well. The first thing is that essentially what we witnessed was really, you know, just circles and triangles moving around a rectangle and the lines opening and closing. That is what like we actually saw. But our understanding of what we saw was communicated via story, right? It was communicated via story in the sense that there were words being added to provide context that maybe we don't know if a triangle even has emotions, right? So there were words being used like they're fighting, right? We're eliciting a particular story from what we're seeing happen. We're making sense of the world around us by that. There were things saying like they're going crazy, right? All that was really happening on the screen was just movement of shapes. But we attributed emotion and we told a story about the relationship that the different shapes had to one another as well. There's also things like, I love that they're dancing, right? They're trapped. These are very much elements of understanding a particular scene that are very human, even though we're looking again at particular shapes in this case as well. Oops. I hear a little bit of buzzing, so I'm gonna pause there, but it might be just on my end. So with that, I want to open us up to this conversation about storytelling, right? The second part that's really important that these two videos illustrate is the role and responsibility we have as folks who are sharing stories that aren't our own, right? And how we also curate those stories. So the second video was essentially the same thing, but it was curated differently. It was just in the reverse, right? And as folks who engage with community members or engage or who are engaging with policymakers and perhaps maybe bringing people to certain tables to share their own story, or we're curating and sharing those stories for people in different spaces, how we curate that also impacts the meaning of the story, right? So we have great responsibility there too. So two lessons from those videos. One, as humans, we are storytellers. Even if we feel that we aren't good at storytelling, storytelling is how we understand the world around us. And then the second thing is we have great responsibility of how we curate and how we share those stories, because the same set of events that are being shared completely take on different meanings based upon where we share those stories, based upon how we share those stories, and what we choose to include or exclude. So thank you so much, Alina and Vanessa, for sharing. All right, let me go ahead and pull up my screen here. So what to expect in this workshop is that you will help develop the story for what this workshop and what this space is going to be today. Part of our process at Pueblo Planning is really to not think of ourselves as the experts, but really as facilitators, and to listen to folks and hear, you know, what is of need, what is of interest, and really trying to curate a set of tools that would be of most value to the community. And so in this community space, we engaged with at least one person on your team to better understand how you currently tell stories. What are some things that would help you share those stories in a more effective way, but also in a more empathetic way that elevates community voices as well. So we heard 5 key things from folks. Folks were really interested in ensuring that there's a consensual storytelling process. So we'll be talking about how to go about consent and storytelling. How to facilitate spaces for people to share their own stories. We'll be talking about that as well. Moving from stories to strategies, where residents involved in the process, where residents' stories can be integrated and be involved in the process of like grant writing, creation of materials, or the development of strategies. How do you connect these stories to action? And how do you facilitate the storytelling process in general? So we'll be going over each of these items today. So with that, As I mentioned, storytelling is the process of sharing and interpreting experiences, collecting, curating, and sharing out a human experience. Storytelling is a powerful force to move the hearts, minds, and influence public policy. I have this picture up. This is actually my son, Kesem. And the reason why I have this picture up because it elicits a particular memory for me. This picture was taken in early August, and we were on an RV camping trip. And on this trip was the first time ever my son shared his first story as a little human. And for myself, as someone who is a storyteller and loves storytelling, it was such a special moment. And so what happened was that we were getting on a paddle boat. I handed Kesem off to my wife, and I then was going to try to attempt to get on the paddle boat. The paddle boat started to kind of like veer away from the dock. I started to do the splits, and I fell into the pond. I was fine, you know, swam back out, got out, and then got into the boat. And this was such a like profound experience for Kesem that the whole time on the boat, he kept telling the story over and over again. Amma got on the boat and her foot and she fell. And then like the entire week, he kept repeating the story over and over again. And there would be new little details to his story in that. And for Kesem, it was like this, like really partially like scary, but silly experience. And it was his way of sharing and processing and interpreting what had happened, because I shared with him, I'm okay, you know, because it was kind of scary for him at first. And so, so he's, you know, this is like a month and a half later, he's still telling this story about the pond and how his ama fell in the pond and there was a boat and a deck, and it's his way of processing. So it's very special for me, like someone even before the age of 2, it's very innate in them to process the world around them through story, and that's a skill that he'll continue to use and develop, right? And in our spaces in advocacy, stories are really powerful forces to move the hearts and minds and influence public policy, as we know, right? So storytelling coupled with data as well, we know that facts and figures aren't enough to really move what is necessary in terms of storytelling. So I want us first to have a conversation around consent. Now, typically, when we think of consent in the framework of storytelling and having folks share out their own story, we typically think of, well, did we get the consent form filled out? And that's basically the only question we ask ourselves when we're thinking about consent. However, consent is in the framework of storytelling, it's much more than just getting that legal form filled out. Consent really requires more than just asking for permission once, but it's an ongoing co-creation process and relationship building process. And so I'm going to walk you through something that's going to be in your toolkit in terms of consent. Now, this looks a little much, but we're going to go through each particular step. Traditionally, we think, okay, we're going to do a storytelling process with the community. We start here, and then we automatically skip over and go to the last section here. Have you asked if they'd be willing to sign a consent form? And that's typically how we're able to check the box in terms of if consent has happened. However, we know that we don't want to do things in a way that robs people of their stories. We want to do things in a way that really people are able to co-create with you in that space, but also share with you, excuse me, elements of their story in a way that best represents who they are and the way they want to be represented and the way they want their communities to be represented as well. So in conversations with you all, Also from my own personal experience in doing this particular process, and also in doing some research around consent and art making, consent and storytelling, have been able to create this little flow chart as a general guideline of what to think about and what to expect. So really, it's really starting at the relationship level and asking yourself, do you have a personal relationship, with the individual sharing their story? If not, are you partnering with an organization that does? And really, if a relationship of some sort isn't established, the going and asking someone for their story is going to be a very extractive process. And also, you may not actually get a story with the amount of details, the amount of depth that you would if there was some kind of established relationship. In our work a lot, we're not rooted in one particular neighborhood. And so we partner with organizations that have those existing relationships so that folks feel safer in the space and also are more willing and open to share. So once the relationship has been established, asking people, are you facilitating opportunities for people to share their own story and removing those barriers? If you are making sure that those barriers are removed, barriers could be something as if you're not providing the appropriate language access for people to share, if you're in this day and age where a lot of things are online, if people don't have access to broadband or have access to technologies to be able to share, how are you then removing those barriers so folks can share? And then first off, asking folks too, and providing every opportunity for folks to share their own story. And are you able to see if folks can share their own story? Yes. Do everything possible first for folks to be able to share their own story. And that could be in the form, in this particular advocacy world, is providing direct public testimony. If they can't be there, maybe that's something that could be audio recorded and then have played in a public hearing. If they can't come to a meeting with a policymaker, maybe that's like a video that they're speaking directly to the folks. Do everything in your power so folks can share their own story on their own terms. And it doesn't always necessitate that they need to be physically present, but how do we bring them into the rooms which they sometimes aren't able to be in? Now, what I heard a lot as well is people asking, well, how do we do a lot of, we hear a lot of stories from communities. How do we share other people's stories in a way that is respectful, in a way that is consensual as well? So if you're sharing a story on someone else's behalf, are you also sharing with that person how their story will be used and where it will be used, right? And that's very important because they should be able to have consent to say, that's okay, or I prefer my story not be used in that way. And then, in the same way, are you also sharing like their story is going to be used to move on a particular statewide policy, or is it going to be used primarily for educational purposes? Making sure that they have the ability to provide consent, again, in the context of how their story is being shared. Are you asking folks, is this a story that is okay that we include your name on, right? Or would you prefer to be anonymous? And then also, have you had a discussion of like how this storytelling sharing is also going to be mutually benefit for the person whose story it is? Mutual benefit can look like a number of things. Sometimes that looks like in terms of providing a stipend or a gift card for someone's time. Sometimes that looks like a particular need or issue that was elevated from them or the broader community that is going to be directly addressed as a result of them sharing that story. So really asking, and working with the community members that are sharing their story to understand what is going to be both like short-term and long-term mutual benefits of the sharing of story. A lot of times advocacy organizations or nonprofit organizations will share these stories it's beneficial to the nonprofit, and a lot of times because these stories are used in like fundraising pitches, are used different, or even to move policy as well. And so those are like wins for the organization in addition to the community. But being mindful of that, there is a benefit in the reason why you're sharing those stories, but how is the community both immediately and in the long term benefiting from the sharing of those stories and that individual as well. And then lastly is are they willing to sign, and have they signed a consent form? And so these are some basic steps. Now, this is not necessarily comprehensive approach to working in a more consent way with community members, but these are some really great questions to keep in mind as we're moving through the process itself. And if you have any questions throughout or comments throughout, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and I'll be sure Natasha will make sure to stop me and before I go to the next section. But if folks have any questions, feel free to add it to the chat box now, and I can definitely pause and answer those questions as well. So how do we facilitate the storytelling process? And this is a question that we heard a lot of. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to pause really fast to give people an opportunity to post in the chat box around consent. I'd love to hear from folks. And also, if you feel more comfortable speaking out, that is okay too. I'd love to hear from folks, just like if have had challenges around like asking for consent or concerns around that. And if there are elements that aren't included in this flow chart, that maybe we'll shoot here too in real time.
Yeah, we do have a first question from Cynthia in the chat box, Monique.
Oh, great. Let me take a look there. Yeah, have you worked with municipalities to look at changing the public comment testimonial laws? These can be an incredible barrier to many. That is a great question. I have not worked directly in terms of like doing the advocacy necessary to change those public testimonial laws. But some of the things that we have done are like actually video recordings from the community and literally like play them in space and write them down or control time so that those voices elevate in those spaces. And these spaces often happen during working hours and makes it very difficult for folks to get there as well. But some other channels, and we'll be talking about channels a little bit later, other channels to think about in terms of outside of public testimony that could also influence elected officials is like through the use of social media in terms of like who you're strategically in those feeds as well. So those are some ways, but I do agree though that public comment and testimonial laws do need to shift in order to better accommodate folks who are actually those that are most typically going to be most impacted from any kind of decision that's being made. And the way that these spaces are set up actually excludes those that are going to be most impacted. So definitely work to be done there. Yeah, and Edgar, yeah, absolutely right. Many public meetings are scheduled at times that are difficult for the community members to attend and participate due to many issues such as transportation, right? The thing is too is, typically you can ask for a translator, but it's at the discretion of the, like say, city council or whomever, if they're going to be allotted the 2 minutes or like double that time. And so I think those kind of like policies need to shift as well, and really taking out the discretion from the individual, but also like kind of this 2 minute more or less like time frame. It's really doesn't do justice to the experiences that folks have. So looking at different channels, which we're going to discuss about, I think 12 different channels later on, as a way to like provide public testimony in more informal to move policy. Good question. Awesome. All right, let me go ahead and pull that presentation back up.
Yeah, and there's one more from Vanessa about youth and storytelling, which we may get to at some other point, but.
Sorry, I did not see that.
No problem.
Great, I'm trying to find it here. Oh, okay. Yeah, youth and storytelling. So we have done that before in the past. We involve the guardians at the beginning of that process, and have the conversations with the guardians first. Even if it's like older youth, like 17, 16-year-olds, we do include the guardian in that conversation. I think one of the challenges though is if we were thinking about, if we were doing, and we haven't done any of this particular work, but let's say about sexual health, right? Like, or about things that where maybe the youth maybe have a different perspective than their guardian. I think that's ground that we haven't necessarily walked on in terms of some of the storytelling. But having said that, we engage with the guardian like at every step of this process as well. Even though the space in which where the youth are sharing their story may be more one-on-one, but the questions that we're asking and the information we're sharing is also with the guardian. It's a good question. All right, so how to facilitate the storytelling process. You know, one of the things I shared is that we have done facilitated storytelling with a wide variety of different folks, but one group in particular that we have done a lot of work with in partnership with organizations is really having folks who have experienced a really big trauma in their lives being able to share that story. These two women here, they actually lost their father, who was hit by a police car, that and he was killed, and the police car was like on this like chase through the neighborhood. And so they shared their story, and like, how do you provide spaces for that to happen, right? One of the things is they have a relationship with the organization we partnered with. They've been volunteering with that organization. They've built community with other families in that organization as well. And so as the organization invited me into the space, I was seen more as a trusted person in that space than if I didn't have a relationship with that organization particularly. And so I'm going to walk us through 12 things to keep in mind as we are sharing or as we're facilitating the storytelling process. One of the first things that I'll share is the importance of starting really broad and building that rapport first, right? You don't want to start off asking the more intimate and sensitive questions right off the bat, even though that's maybe where you would want to like ultimately go. You really want to establish a relationship with that individual and ask really broad questions. So for example, this project I did was called Streets Have Stories. When I had a little booth and I just had a sign that said like, share your story. Everybody was there to commemorate someone in their life. And the way I started so people self-selected to come to the booth. And the way I started the conversation is like, what brings you here today? So broad, right? Knowing the context of the space as well. And that from there, people started to share, well, I'm here because I really support this organization and the work they're doing. And so asking also like more detailed questions and follow-up questions with that. How long have you been with this organization, and what brought you to this organization? And so then we start to get into like more details. And then after we build more of a general rapport, we can then start to ask more specifics about what's bringing them to that space, and the connection to their life experiences. And then we could drill down and have more intimate conversations and questions where maybe they share the name of the loved one, in this particular case. And some of them I was like, can you tell me, instead of going straight to the incident, can you tell me like a little bit more about Jesus? And then their eyes would light up, and I'd be like, Jesus was just amazing. He was this woodworker, and he just really loved his family. He loved to cook. And so we're also building a rapport, but I'm also allowing like folks to share things that they would be more comfortable sharing as well in that space, that it's also important to allowing people to bring their entire selves, but ease into the story that has a lot of maybe pain for them as well. And a lot of us that are doing this work as well, we're asking people to share very intimate details of their lives. If it's about them, wanting to walk their kids to school safely, and maybe there's broken sidewalks, that's trauma in the built environment, right? But also there's opportunities to share really joyous things, right? In terms of what a particular public space means to them and their family, right? And why they want to ensure that it stays that way. But with that as well, some other things to keep in mind are around asking open-ended questions, making sure that your questions are really broad and open-ended, so that people don't just give a yes or no answer. You want people to share a story, not a yes or no, right? Make sure you ask follow-up questions, and sometimes follow-up questions can be just as simple of, tell me more about ... right? Or can you describe ... right? Sometimes follow-up questions could be just that simple. And with that as well, that shows that you're actively listening, right? People want to share more if they feel that you're connecting with them and you're listening with them. And so the way you could do that is to really like, without interrupting them, be like, that was really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, to reinforce that you are actively listening. One of the key things to keep in mind is also, and this is really hard because one of the ways that as humans we connect is we kind of interrupt each other in a conversation, right? So a friend of mine will be saying something and I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Or I'd be, yeah, I can see what you're saying. And we don't catch ourselves doing that. And this is a very human thing to do, and actually a good thing to do in conversation, right? This is how we nurture spaces of trust amongst friends and family, is through that affirmation of how we connect with people as they're sharing a particular lived experience, right? The challenge though with when doing like facilitating storytelling, part of it is that we might be like recording some audio or some video, and we want to make sure that the editing of that doesn't become difficult, and we'd have to like make sure that we're not centering our own voices in those spaces, but really having people center their own. And so it's really important to, either through physical cues or waiting and having them pause before you provide that affirmation, to ensure that there aren't any interruptions. The thing is too, is people sometimes need to do a pause to think about what they're going to share, and it's quite okay to allow that uncomfortable pause, because it gives people the time and space to think. With be patient, again, allow those pauses to happen. Be flexible, even though you may be, maybe your interview is on a particular topic. Each conversation you have with a different individual or group of people allow flexibility for the conversation to go where it needs to go. Be polite, be respectful of the interviewee's wishes. So essentially, if they ask to turn off the tape recorder, or if you can see their physical cues, like that they don't want to move forward, or answer a question, be respectful of that and move forward. Don't try to do follow-up questions to probe in deeper. Maybe the relationship isn't quite there to have that kind of conversation, or maybe just the healing isn't they're not in a space of healing to share certain things as well. And so I'm going to repeat these really quickly, but they're going to be in your toolkit as well. So one is start broad, the rapport first, ask open-ended questions, do not interrupt, ask follow-up questions, keep focus, actively listen, be patient, be flexible, be polite, respect the interviewee's wishes, verbal encouragement, and watch for nonverbal cues. So if you see them being uncomfortable in space, watch for those particular nonverbal cues. So I'm going to pause there to see if folks have any questions about that, or have an experience in which maybe they implemented one of these things. See, Marisa put, allowing pauses is such a good reminder. I know I have a tendency to try to fill what I perceive as awkward silence, right? And in the Zoom era, there is a Zoom pause as well that leads to discomfort and anxiety, honestly. More psychologists are doing research on this and the emotional toll that it's taking on us unknowingly. And so, you know, be okay with the pause and the silence is really important. So I just wanted to model that right now to allow that to happen. So let's see, do folks have any questions or comments on that? And again, this is going to be detailed in your toolkit as well. Yeah, Vanessa.
Hi, thank you so much for all of those great tips and guidelines. I think those are all really important. I was curious because you mentioned that you facilitated these discussions like at an event or like in a booth, and I was wondering if, because like a lot of what we are, you know, a lot of our approach is like going to the people where it's convenient, right? Like going to the park, going to school, you know, we bring ourselves to those spaces. I'm wondering if in your experience, location, like the setting, how do you facilitate, like, I'm just thinking like logistics, but then also what makes people feel comfortable, if you have any guidance for that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. There's a number of settings in which we facilitate these types of conversations. So this event that I was sharing with you was an event that was really centered around like remembering the folks who have been lost to traffic violence. And so that was like the intended purpose of it. So we weren't like at a random park on a Tuesday without that kind of context of what that space was going to hold. And so I'd never go to like this park space and then start asking people those types of questions. But because the framing of the event and who was invited to the space set kind of the permissions to engage in these types of conversations in a different way, right? But so I'm actually working on a project right now around economic resilience and recovery in a particular neighborhood. And I'm working with 7 community-based organizations, and each of them are gonna share with me 5 to 10 people to connect with in the community. Well, I'm having the community-based organizations dictate to me what each individual needs, so and how to engage with them. So for example, there's a big Somali community, so I'll be engaging some Somali men who are business owners. But what the community-based organizations share with me is they do better not talking one-on-one, but talking in a small group and in person. So we have to facilitate outdoors, no more than 3 people, socially distanced, everyone masked. That's going to be our storytelling session there. For some other individuals, like a business owner coming to their shop on their like when there's like less customer flow, and having that conversation outdoors one-on-one, right? For others, like we're also going to be hearing stories from youth as well, who feel more comfortable on the Zoom platform or FaceTime or whatever that is, we can do that virtually. So I'm really having the community-based organizations identify the spaces that make most sense for that particular population, even though we are talking about the same like project and themes. I'm not approaching the storytelling all in one cookie cutter way. I'm really having the community-based organizations dictate, because they hold those relationships, what is the best and most comfortable way that this individual or these group of people are going to be able to share their story. And sometimes that is in event spaces, like I mentioned, but other times it looks very different. And then also during these times when we're trying to be as safe as possible, you know, we're also on the ground, like adjusting and adapting to these times as well, what that means and looks like. So these large events aren't necessarily things we're doing anymore, right? But how do we then take the intention and spirit is really connecting with people, providing a safe space. Also, it's really healing for people to share their story if they're sharing that in a safe space. So how do we also facilitate spaces of healing as well in those spaces? So yeah, so I guess my answer is we take the direction of those who hold those relationships. Sometimes it's your own organization that holds those relationships, and so you know how to best create those safe and facilitate those safe spaces. But sometimes we have to rely upon others that hold those relationships and really follow their lead and think creatively of like, okay, what does that mean and look like? And how are we going to engage people in those spaces? Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much. I think it's just great, like no cookie cutter approach, right? Just unique context for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me go ahead and share my next screen, and I'm going to cut out the next activity, but if you're interested in taking a deeper dive, and this is my advertisement for a workshop too, if you're interested, we're actually be doing a lot more hands-on, where these concepts that I'm sharing with you today, you're actually going to be practicing them in real time during the workshop setting. And then I'll be there to like help troubleshoot or provide any additional guidance as well. So with that, I want us to think about, you know, imagining your audience. And this is really key. So we talked about in the first part of the workshop, really about folks sharing their own story, how they can go about doing that, how we can facilitate spaces for folks to do that as well. How do we remove the barriers for folks to be able to share their own stories? And then the second part of this is also understanding who is going to be hearing these stories, right? And understanding your audience. So one of the things, and this is also in the toolkit, is to imagine your audience, understand, you know, who are they? What are their demographics? What are their digital habits, right? Is it an elected official that's on Twitter all the time? Is it someone who maybe isn't on social media, right? Maybe they rely a lot on email. What are their digital habits? Where do they get their information? From news sources to television programs, to word of mouth. How do they get their information? What kind of educational background, kind of jobs do they have? Also, what movies, what shows, what entertainment do they consume? Because when we're thinking about storytelling as well, could we connect to stories that already resonate and connect to them and that they're familiar with? What's the relationship to your organization, right? And what do we think of, what can we imagine in terms of what their hopes, their dreams, their fears, and biases they hold? And any other important information to imagine our audience. Because once we're able to imagine our audience, this is going to help inform the message we share, right? And how we curate those stories. And also what channels we're going to use to communicate with that particular audience, right? So the message we share and what channels are we going to use to communicate that message or that story to that particular audience, right? So we really need to understand, like, and there's multiple audiences, right? Sometimes it's a policymaker, sometimes it's a community member who's not quite on board with where the other community members are, right? It could be a business owner. It could be any number of donors. It could be philanthropic organizations. So there's a whole host of different audiences as well. And so what's important is to create a kind of like an audience profile for each of those different groups so that you really understand, again, what message or messages are going to resonate with that particular audience, and what channels do we need to engage with in order to make sure that message moves forward. And I'm going to do a quick time check. I have about 4 minutes, and I just want to really briefly go over choosing the right channel. Again, this is in the toolkit as well. There's not one particular channel. And when I'm saying channel, that is in terms of like, it could be an event and where you're communicating your message. It could be blogs or articles. It could be social media. It could also be, media relations. So where you're working with a reporter and to get your story covered. It could be through email. It could be a number of things, right? And you can use video, you can use audio, you can use written text. There's a number of modalities that can be used in all these different spaces. Again, there's not one right or wrong channel to choose. It's really dependent upon the audience that you're trying to reach, but also dependent upon your capacity and resources within that. So for example, I have this picture here of actually an event we did out in Bend, Oregon, where we did a community storytelling with various folks in a particular neighborhood. And they were sharing essentially their vision for their neighborhood and what they want to, what they value and want really to remain the same, but also as their neighborhood changes, what advice would they give to the city and developers as that neighborhood changes? And this sets the parameter for their like advocacy asks for both like the city and developers. So we did this huge event and it generated a lot of media attention. We were able to also engage folks in capturing more community input in what that community vision was. We were able to meaningfully connect with our target audience, which was the other residents in the neighborhood that maybe didn't engage in the process, but we wanted to include in the process as well. We were able to raise awareness about the design guidelines and policy asks of this group, able to engage, also bring in elected officials. So talking about public testimony, right? This whole event was public testimony, right? There was elected officials there. Now the community members aren't stepping into like City Hall, but City Hall is stepping into the community, right? And so how do we were able to connect with folks outside of those traditional 2-minute public testimony type things. But there's also drawbacks to this too, right? So this, you only have one opportunity to get it right. So if the event goes poorly or if the message isn't clearly communicated, that could leave a lasting impression and really harm or damage a particular campaign. It costs money to produce something like this, right? From renting the facility to getting all the equipment that's necessary, maybe even food. And event planning is a job in itself, right? And so thinking about, there's a lot of benefits to doing event-based, like, and using events as a channel, but there's also some drawbacks. And so you also want to like think about, should this be an option? What do I need in order to make this a viable option? And should I avoid this as well? And so each one of these channels, and I think I've included 5 channels to look at in the toolkit. Each of them has benefits. Each of them has drawbacks. Each of them has considerations in terms of move forward if you have particular types of resources and capacity, or avoid if you don't have those resources and capacity. For example, with media relations, right? It's great to get your story on the news because it's free. People trust the news more than they do maybe an ad of some sort, or just websites that aren't associated to the. Some drawbacks in that you may not have control over your, right? Drawbacks is that it's sometimes difficult to make sure that your targeted audience hears it, because it's kind of going out to the general public. One of the drawbacks too is that in order to do this media relations channel is that you oftentimes need relationships with reporters or journalists, and being able to like kind of get on their radar, and having those relationships take time, right? And so again, this is if there's not a wrong or a right channel. Every single channel, one, should be dependent upon what audience you're trying to reach, and needs to be appropriate to that. But every single channel has benefits, drawbacks, and has things that you should consider in terms of whether or not you should use or you should avoid that particular channel. And I'm going to actually stop here for this conversation because we are at time. But again, we're going to go over each of these things in the in workshop 2. You'll be able to get hands-on, actually get the toolkit in advance so you can take a look at it, but get hands-on practice on how to do all of this as well, and much more. And but yeah, I just want to we're a couple minutes over time, but open it up to a few more questions that folks have, and just thank you all for having me in this space today.
Thank you so much, Monique. Yeah, if you have other questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat box. If you have to move on to the next thing in your day, like go ahead and drop off. But we are happy to answer questions now or in workshop 2 as well. And if you guys have any questions in between the two, I'm happy to pass them on to Monique as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate you all being here today. And really, I really love that folks are interested in storytelling. It's just so powerful. And also beyond being able to move policy, it's such a healing and affirming exercise for everybody involved in it too. And so appreciate you all being here and your interest in this conversation today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Monique.
Thank you.
Great.